The horizon glowed red as if the earth itself bled into the sky. Captain Viktor Sokolov tightened the strap on his rifle and surveyed the battlefield through a cracked pair of binoculars. Ahead lay the ruins of a nameless village, its stone walls shattered, its church tower reduced to rubble. The men of the Annihilation Battalion, nicknamed so for their reputation to destroy everything in their path, crouched silently behind him. They were no strangers to fire or steel, but this morning was different. Orders had come, hold this ground at all costs. For many, it was a death sentence. Sergeant Ivan Markov spat into the mud. "Victor, you know what this means," he muttered. "They won't send reinforcements. We're the wall now." Victor lowered the binoculars. His face, scarred from a grenade years before, betrayed nothing. "Then we hold. If this is where we end, we make it count." The battalion was reduced to less than 200 men. They had fought through forests, trenches, and shattered cities. Now, on this blood-soaked hill overlooking the ruins, they prepared for their last stand. Private Yuri, the youngest among them, barely 19, clutched his weapon nervously. "Captain, do you think anyone will remember us?" Victor looked at him for a long moment. The boy's eyes trembled with fear. "Yes," Victor said finally. "History remembers those who do not break." A low rumble rolled across the earth. The enemy was coming, tanks, artillery, and waves of infantry. The Annihilation Soldiers tightened their grips on rifles, machine guns, and grenades. The village ahead would become their grave, or their glory. The sun rose higher, casting a fiery glow across the smoking ruins. It was the dawn of their final battle. The ground shook as artillery shells tore into the hillside. The air filled with dust and acrid smoke. The battalion, already hardened by years of war, crouched in their makeshift trenches, waiting for the assault. "Hold until you see their helmets," Ivan roared, his voice booming above the thunder. The first wave came, enemy infantry charging through the rubble. Bullets cracked. Machine guns spat fire. Men screamed as they fell, bodies tumbling into the mud. Yuri fired wildly, tears streaming down his face. He had never killed so many men in so little time. Each pull of the trigger tore a piece of his innocence away. "Steady, boy," Victor barked, firing his rifle with surgical precision. Every shot must count. Explosions tore through the battalion's lines. A bunker collapsed, burying 3 men alive. Still, the Annihilation Soldiers fought on, their reputation proving true. The enemy expected a quick breach, but instead they found themselves cut down in heaps. Hours passed. Smoke blotted out the sun. Tanks rolled in, their turrets spewing death. The Annihilation Battalion scrambled for anti-tank rifles and Molotov cocktails. Ivan charged forward, his massive frame unshaken by fear. With a roar, he leapt onto the nearest tank, smashing a grenade under its hatch. The explosion tore the machine apart, flames bursting skyward. But Ivan did not rise. His body was flung into the mud, motionless. "Sergeant!" Victor shouted, but there was no time for grief. Another tank advanced. Yuri, trembling but resolute, hurled a Molotov. Fire engulfed the beast, and it screeched like a dying monster before collapsing. The men cheered, but exhaustion weighed heavy. Their numbers dwindled. Every victory cost blood. As dusk approached, only a fraction of the battalion remained. They huddled in the ruins of the church, preparing for the final assault. "Captain," Yuri whispered, voice hoarse, "we can't hold much longer." Victor's eyes burned with determination. "Then we don't hold. We strike." Night fell, cloaking the battlefield in shadows. The enemy prepared their last, overwhelming attack. Floodlights illuminated the ruins. Victor gathered the survivors, barely 60 men now. Faces smeared with blood and soot, eyes hollow but unbroken. "This is it," Victor said. "We are the Annihilation Soldiers. We will not be remembered for surrender. Tonight, we carve our names into history." The men roared in response, voices ragged but fierce. They strapped grenades to their belts, loaded the last of their ammunition, and prepared to charge. The enemy came like a tidal wave, armored vehicles leading, infantry swarming behind. "Forward!" Victor bellowed. The battalion surged out of the ruins, a storm of fire and fury. They moved like ghosts, cutting through enemy ranks with savage precision. Grenades tore through armored columns, rifles cracked, and knives flashed in the dark. Yuri followed Victor closely, adrenaline drowning his fear. Every breath was fire, every heartbeat thunder. He no longer thought of survival, only of fighting until he could fight no more. One by one, the Annihilation Soldiers fell, but each death dragged enemies into the abyss with them. The field became a graveyard of men and machines. A mortar blast hurled Victor to the ground. His leg shattered, but still he crawled forward, dragging himself toward an enemy machine gun nest. With one final scream, he hurled his last grenade, silencing the gun in a burst of flame. Nearby, Yuri fought desperately, bayonet clashing against steel. He was struck, but before collapsing, he fired his last bullet straight into an enemy officer's chest. The enemy faltered. Their advance slowed, confusion spreading. The Annihilation Soldiers had carved a wound so deep that even overwhelming numbers could not ignore it. When dawn finally broke, the hill was silent, a sea of corpses, wreckage, and blood. Reinforcements finally arrived at sunrise, climbing over the bodies to reach the hilltop. What they found was not an army, but legends. Barely a dozen Annihilation Soldiers survived, too wounded to rise. Among them was Yuri, coughing blood, eyes staring at the sky. "Did we win?" he whispered. The officer who led the reinforcements nodded solemnly. "You held the line. The enemy has broken." Yuri smiled faintly, tears mixing with blood. "Then Captain was right. History will remember." His breath stilled. Victor lay nearby, unconscious, his body broken but alive. The survivors were carried away, though many would never see another battlefield. Word spread quickly. The Annihilation Battalion had fought to the last, turning the tide by sacrificing themselves. Songs were written, stories told, statues raised. For the enemy, the hill became a place of nightmares, whispered as cursed ground. For Victor and the handful who survived, it became a scar they bore for the rest of their lives. Years later, Victor would stand before a memorial of his men. The names etched in stone stretched endlessly, a roll call of the fallen. He placed his hand on the cold granite. "You did not die in vain," he whispered. "The world is free because of you." The wind whistled through the trees, carrying faint echoes of battle cries long past. The ghosts of the Annihilation Soldiers would forever guard the hill where they made their final stand. And so, the story of their last battle was not one of defeat, but of victory. Not in survival, but in unyielding defiance, in proving that courage could outlive flesh, and sacrifice could shape history. They were the Annihilation Soldiers. And this was their legacy.